Amazon, the e-commerce giant, has made a controversial move by turning its back on the U.S. market amidst political tensions. The president of the U.S. expressed dissatisfaction after a report revealed that Amazon has started listing additional costs due to Trump's tariffs. These tariffs have put immense pressure on businesses and become a hot-button issue in the relationship between Amazon and the administration. It's not just a trade war, it's a political showdown, with Amazon clearly taking hostile actions against the president's policies. Notably, Amazon's move to disclose tariff-related costs could send shockwaves to consumers and anyone following this saga. Could this decision have serious consequences for Amazon? How will this move change the face of U.S. trade? Let's dive into this surprising story and explore its potential long-term impacts. If you agree with these developments, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, leave a 0. Enjoy the video and don't forget to like, share, and leave a sub in support. Now let's dive into the story. In April 2025, the Trump administration implemented a series of tariffs on imported goods, imposing a 10% tariff on most foreign products, with higher tariffs of up to 145% on goods from China. This tariff policy aimed to protect domestic industries and encourage consumers to buy American-made goods, while also reducing the trade deficit between the U.S. and its trade partners. However, this policy has not only affected industries, but also had significant impacts on the daily lives of American citizens. With these tariffs in place, the prices of consumer goods such as electronics, clothing, food, and other essential items have surged. A mobile phone, a set of clothes, or even basic household goods have become more expensive, increasing the financial burden on American families. Products from countries with low production costs, particularly China, have been heavily affected by the high tariffs. This has created more difficulty for consumers, who are now faced with more expensive choices and a shortage of key products. For American citizens, the impact of this tariff policy is evident in their daily lives. Electronics, clothing, and food have become more expensive, which is significantly altering their lifestyle. Middle and low-income families are the ones most directly affected, as they are forced to spend more on basic items. While their income has not risen proportionally, the prices of goods keep rising. This not only causes financial stress for families, but also affects their quality of life, making them cut back on non-essential spending, which in turn affects consumer demand and slows economic growth. Moreover, this tariff policy also affects the domestic manufacturing and retail industries. While the Trump administration's goal was to create a consumption market for American-made products, many companies have struggled to adjust their supply chains and production, forcing them to increase prices or cut production. Companies that import raw materials and goods from abroad are also facing higher tariffs, which raises product costs, and ultimately, consumers bear the burden of these increased costs. While the goal of the Trump administration was to protect domestic industries and reduce the trade deficit, this tariff policy has led to unintended consequences for the U.S. economy. One major issue is the rising cost of living for American citizens, which reduces consumer purchasing power and leads to a decline in domestic consumption, a critical factor in economic growth. Businesses also face higher production and shipping costs, making it harder to compete with international rivals. Although this policy may benefit some domestic industries, it has made others struggle and forced them to downsize. The impact of tariffs on businesses and consumers has also been evident in the stock market. Investors and large companies have witnessed a decrease in profits and stock prices due to rising production costs and reduced consumer demand. This has led economic analysts to reconsider the long-term effects of the tariff policy and whether it could worsen the economic problems in the U.S. The Trump administration's tariff policy has provided several important lessons for the global economy, especially regarding the management of international trade relations and the effects of protectionist measures on domestic economies. One of the biggest lessons is the careful consideration between protecting domestic industries and the negative impact on citizens' cost of living. While tariffs may help some industries grow, they can also create disruptions and affect the ability of most people to consume. Additionally, the tariff policy raises the question of whether these protective measures are sustainable, as the global economy becomes increasingly reliant on global supply chains. Imposing tariffs on imported goods could make it difficult for domestic manufacturers to find alternative sources of raw materials and products, resulting in shortages and reduced productivity. Therefore, a more comprehensive trade policy, which includes enhancing domestic production capacity and maintaining stable international trade relations, may be a more effective option. Although the Trump administration's tariff policy was implemented with the aim of boosting domestic manufacturing, the long-term negative impacts are undeniable. Higher prices for goods and difficulties in maintaining consumer spending are leading many families in the U.S. to face more serious financial challenges. Therefore, an important question arises. Can the U.S. maintain this policy without harming its citizens and economy? Amazon, the retail giant, is facing an unprecedented crisis, largely due to new tariffs imposed by the Trump administration. These tariffs, which reached a staggering $13 billion, have shaken Amazon's financial structure, threatening the company's stability and growth. For years, Amazon built a massive empire not only by offering products from global manufacturers, but also by optimizing shipping and warehousing services. However, the sudden shift in the tariff landscape has forced the company to confront challenges never faced before, especially as transportation and production costs have surged. The new tariffs have raised the prices of products sold by Amazon, making the company's offerings more expensive and less competitive compared to other online retailers. While Amazon has maintained its dominance in the market, the overwhelming financial burden of these tariffs has led to a decline in profits and challenges in sustaining its efficient business model. The Trump administration's tariff policies have put Amazon into a survival crisis, where finding solutions to adjust its supply chain and distribution system is now unavoidable. The crisis goes beyond tariffs and extends to other areas of retail, causing Amazon to face a series of serious issues in its operations. Retailers who previously sold through Amazon's platform are starting to pull out due to rising costs and instability in the supply chain. Additional tariffs have made product sourcing inefficient, forcing these retailers to increase prices and making it harder for them to stay competitive. This has led to a situation where the retailers can no longer collaborate with Amazon as they once did. This situation has also caused congestion in Amazon's warehouses, with inventory levels rising significantly. Many products, particularly those from countries heavily affected by the tariffs, like China, are now stuck in storage with no way to sell them. This stockpile of unsold goods has increased operating costs, creating a vicious cycle that reduces the efficiency of Amazon's renowned warehousing system. Not only retailers are struggling, but consumers are also facing significant changes in their online shopping habits. The increase in prices due to tariffs has made many products less affordable, causing frustration among consumers. Items that were previously easy to purchase at low prices are now much more expensive, reducing consumer access to products. The added costs of tariffs have not only raised product prices but also led to shortages of popular items due to disruptions in the supply chain. This has led to a drop in Amazon's revenue from consumer goods, especially as shoppers become more cautious with their spending. The uncontrollable price hikes and reduced choices have caused many to turn away from online shopping, choosing instead traditional shopping methods or searching for cheaper alternatives from other competitors. This not only decreases purchasing power, but also impacts Amazon's long-term growth as customers seek out alternatives or reduce their online shopping needs. For Amazon, this challenge serves as an important lesson about the risks of relying on global supply chains and the impact of protectionist policies on business operations. The company has shown resilience and flexibility in seeking alternative solutions, but tariff-related issues and supply chain disruptions will continue to pose challenges in the short term. Amazon must quickly adjust its operational strategy and find ways to mitigate the impact of tariffs on product value and operating costs. The most important lesson from this crisis is that over-reliance on sourcing and manufacturing from countries outside the U.S. can be a vulnerable factor when major policy shifts occur. Diversifying supply chains and exploring localized solutions can help Amazon and other companies reduce the negative impact of tariffs in the future. Tariffs have caused profound changes in the global trade system, especially for tech giants like Amazon, Apple, Google, and Microsoft, companies that operate across borders and heavily rely on global supply chains. When governments impose tariffs on imported goods, tech companies cannot avoid the impact, as many of the products and components they use come from countries outside the US, particularly China. Changes in tariff policies not only affect the value of the products tech companies offer, but also disrupt the long-term business strategies they have built. These companies, which are accustomed to using low-cost components from countries with cheaper production costs, now face significantly higher costs due to tariffs. This impacts not just their ability to manufacture tech products, but also affects the prices consumers must pay. A big question that many people are asking is, who will bear the highest cost in this situation? Will the corporations absorb the costs and reduce their profits? Or will the government intervene to ease the burden? Or ultimately, will consumers be the ones most affected when they have to pay higher prices for the tech products they buy? With tariffs imposed on imported goods, especially tech components, the key question that company leaders and governments must face is, who will bear the higher cost? This change is not merely a production cost issue, but it is a determining factor in deciding who will be responsible for this impact. Large corporations like Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft may have to choose between keeping prices stable and accepting losses or passing these costs on to consumers by raising product prices. However, raising prices could lead to a loss of customer trust and reduced demand, negatively affecting revenue and profits. This creates a difficult situation for tech companies, as they must make an important decision between protecting short-term profits or retaining long-term customers. Meanwhile, governments face similarly tough choices. If they do not provide support for tech companies, tariffs could weaken the economy and lead to job losses in many industries. On the other hand, if the government intervenes too much, they will face backlash from political opponents and could even increase costs for consumers. Therefore, finding a balanced policy that protects both businesses and consumers becomes a complex issue that policymakers need to carefully consider. Amazon, one of the largest tech companies in the world, is facing an unprecedented dilemma. The company has built a strong global retail system through cost-cutting strategies and supply chain optimization. But with the increased costs from tariffs, it now faces a serious challenge. The key question for Amazon at this point is whether the company will keep prices stable and accept losses, or pass the costs on to consumers to protect its profits. This is not an easy decision. If Amazon chooses to keep prices stable, the company might have to endure a decline in profits in the short term, but it will retain customer trust. However, in the long term, maintaining low prices without adjusting costs could prevent Amazon from sustaining profits and its market position. Meanwhile, raising prices could create difficulties for consumers, especially in an unstable economic period. Furthermore, adjusting product prices could cause Amazon to lose its competitive edge, as competitors may offer products at lower prices, or even consumers may turn away from shopping online. All these factors create a dilemma for Amazon and other tech companies. The conflict between tariffs and tech giants is not just an economic battle, but also a showdown about sustainable development in global trade. Tech companies, which rely on global supply chains to reduce costs and optimize production, now face greater challenges as protectionist policies are being applied. This creates an important lesson about the dangers of over-reliance on international supply chains and the impact of trade protection measures on tech giants. In the future, tech companies need to develop more flexible strategies to deal with tariffs and protectionist policies. Searching for domestic supply sources and diversifying supply chains will help them minimize the impact of tariffs and protect their profits. However, this requires innovation and significant investment in domestic technology and production, a challenge that is not easy for large tech companies. By mid-2025, Amazon began to react to the profound changes in global tariffs and supply chains. To maintain cost stability and preserve profits, Amazon started adjusting its supply chain, shifting from traditional suppliers to countries with lower tariffs and more competitive pricing, such as Mexico, India, and Vietnam. These countries became new destinations for Amazon's sourcing needs, helping the company maintain reasonable costs. This strategy aimed to mitigate the severe impact of tariffs, particularly on imported goods from China and other high-tariff nations. The shift not only allowed Amazon to reduce costs, but also helped the company keep product prices stable for consumers. However, this transition was not straightforward. While countries like Mexico, India, and Vietnam could provide products at lower costs, adjusting the supply chain and forming new relationships with suppliers required substantial investments in both time and finances. Additionally, Amazon had to ensure that products still met quality standards and international requirements, which added a layer of complexity in maintaining the company's brand reputation. Despite these challenges, the strategy was seen as a necessary step to mitigate the impact of tariffs and maintain a flexible supply chain, especially in an increasingly complicated global economy. While this shift in Amazon's supply chain has provided direct benefits to the company by reducing costs and maintaining price stability, the consequences of moving supply chains out of the U.S. have had wide-reaching effects on the domestic economy and labor market. As Amazon shifted a large portion of its orders to other countries to avoid tariffs, U.S. ports and logistics centers no longer received the same volume of goods. This led to a downturn in operations at U.S.-based logistics facilities and ports, directly impacting the labor market. Dock workers, truck drivers, and employees at distribution centers across the U.S. faced reduced working hours and shifts. The shift in the supply chain reduced the workload at these facilities, leading to unemployment or decreased wages for a significant portion of the workforce in the transportation and logistics sectors. This not only affected workers but also impacted ancillary industries, from transportation service providers to traditional retail stores, where many workers previously found employment. This situation presents a major challenge for the U.S. economy, especially as large corporations like Amazon shift production and consumption to other countries to minimize costs. The decrease in activity at ports and logistics centers may cause major disruptions in the domestic supply chain, affecting the ability to deliver goods and reducing the competitiveness of the U.S. economy in key industries. While Amazon's strategy of shifting its supply chain may help the company sustain profits in the short term, the long-term effects on the U.S. economy and labor market could lead to significant hardships. Workers in transportation and logistics will face reduced hours or even job loss, while other ancillary sectors will also feel the impact from the decline in activity at distribution centers. The U.S. government and relevant agencies must consider policies to support workers in affected industries while creating new employment opportunities to mitigate the negative effects on income and livelihoods. Furthermore, measures should be taken to encourage large companies like Amazon to maintain production and consumption within the U.S., ensuring that the U.S. economy does not lose an important part of its role in the global supply chain. If you agree with what's happening, drop a 1 in the comments. If you disagree, leave a 0. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a sub in support. And now, let's dive into the next developments. As Amazon adjusts its supply chain strategy and shifts its operations to countries like Mexico, Vietnam, and India to avoid the impact of tariffs, this move is not only affecting the company but also causing significant changes in the global economy. Competitors, particularly e-commerce giants from Europe and Asia, quickly recognized this opportunity and began expanding their operations. For example, Alibaba, China's largest e-commerce conglomerate, has seized this opportunity to strengthen its presence in new markets. With this shift, Alibaba has not only seen strong growth in Asia, but has also begun targeting markets in Western Europe and the US, areas where Amazon has long dominated. Other businesses in Asia and Europe are also keenly aware of the potential of these shifting markets and are adjusting their strategies to capitalize on changes in the global supply chain. This is creating a major transformation in the distribution and control of global supply chains. Larger companies are not only competing directly with Amazon, but are also seizing opportunities to capture market share in regions where Amazon previously held a near monopoly. Amazon's shift has made competition fiercer, especially as rivals become more flexible and capable of leveraging cost-effective sourcing from new countries. The shift in supply chains is not just a short-term change. It could have lasting impacts on the global economy and businesses worldwide. The countries that Amazon is shifting to, such as Mexico, Vietnam, and India, are not only receiving substantial investments from the tech giant, but are also attracting other international businesses and investors, helping to grow the industries in these countries. Manufacturing plants and distribution centers are being built in Mexico, Vietnam, and India, creating millions of job opportunities for local populations. This is helping to improve the economies of these countries and reduce their dependence on high-cost nations like China. These countries are now becoming powerful players in the global supply chain, forcing many companies and nations to adjust their methods of production and distribution. Investment in these countries not only helps companies reduce costs, but also changes how goods are produced globally. These changes could lead to a restructuring in key industries, from electronics manufacturing to consumer goods, altering how companies operate and strategize. Amazon's strategic shift marks a significant turning point in the restructuring of global supply chains. This is not just a change in one company's strategy, but a major shift in how globalization and product distribution are evolving. For decades, large companies have relied on supply chains from low-cost manufacturing nations like China to keep costs down and maximize profits. However, protectionist trade policies and tariffs are dramatically changing the direction of these supply chains. As major companies like Amazon and Apple shift their sourcing of goods to countries like Mexico and Vietnam, a new model is emerging, where companies will source supplies not only from traditional countries, but also from emerging markets with more competitive production costs. This shift is not only changing how large companies operate, but is also impacting the entire international trade system. This change could make it harder for some countries, particularly those with non-competitive manufacturing industries, to maintain their position in the global supply chain. At the same time, countries like Mexico, Vietnam, and India will likely increase their roles and influence in the global economy, playing a critical part in supplying materials and products to large companies. One of the most profound impacts of this shift in supply chains is its effect on the global labor market. Countries like Mexico, Vietnam, and India are not only benefiting from the investments of major companies, but are also creating millions of new job opportunities. This will help reduce unemployment rates and stimulate economic growth in these countries. However, this shift could also reduce job opportunities in countries that were once major manufacturing hubs, like China and the US. Companies manufacturing in the US and nations relying on global supply chains will face increasingly fierce competition from countries with lower production costs. The tariff policy of the Trump administration has caused significant disruptions in the US economy. While the goal was to protect domestic industries and reduce the trade deficit, the consequences of these tariffs were inevitable. One of the most apparent effects is the weakening of domestic industries as production and shipping costs rise, forcing companies to face intense competition from other countries. Countries like Mexico, Vietnam, and India have seized this opportunity to rise, becoming new manufacturing and export hubs. With lower production costs and fewer tariff impacts, these countries have attracted large investments from multinational companies, while the US struggles to maintain domestic production. This not only diminishes job creation in the US, but also reduces the competitiveness of the US economy on the global stage. One of the most painful outcomes of the tariff policy is the loss of jobs for thousands of American workers. As companies shift supply chains and production to lower-cost countries, many workers in the manufacturing and transportation sectors in the US have faced reduced hours and unemployment. Logistics centers, ports, and other supporting industries have also seen a sharp decrease in hiring, increasing unemployment and reducing workers' incomes. Meanwhile, U.S. industries that once benefited from global supply chains now face higher costs and shortages of raw materials. American companies are not only losing their competitive edge, but also witnessing a decline in profits, which severely impacts the domestic economy. These effects raise a big question. Can the U.S. adapt to a world of trade not bound by borders? In an increasingly globalized world, where countries no longer follow rigid trade rules, the U.S. will have to face challenges not only from tariffs, but also from shifting supply chains and rising competition from other developed nations. The U.S. government and major companies need to find flexible solutions to protect the economy while maintaining competitiveness in the global market. We invite you to share your thoughts on the impact of tariffs on the U.S. economy and the future of global supply chains. Can the U.S. adapt to these changes and find a new path to recovery and growth? Leave your opinions in the comments section below, and don't forget to continue following for deeper insights in upcoming videos. Please like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on future stories and in-depth analyses of economic, political, and trade issues ahead.